Hello and welcome to Association Amplified Live. Today we're talking about mentorship and how it's evolving and what associations can do to help both mentors and emerging professionals navigate the changes. Joining me is Amberlee Huggins, president of the American Marketing Association, Washington, D.C., one of the largest chapters of the American Marketing Association. Amberlee is someone who thinks about this stuff quite a bit, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation. Amberlee, really glad to have you.
Hi, Marcus. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
And to everyone watching with us today, you can drop some questions for Amberlee. Just leave them in the panel below, and we'll get to them towards the end of the show.
Great.
So, Amberlee, you've talked about how AI is changing the dynamic between mentors and emerging professionals. How are both sides experiencing that shift right now? And are they seeing each other's realities clearly?
It's a good question, Marcus. I mean, I think, every organization, every company has its own culture. And at the same time, there's some overarching themes. One is that, there's a huge amount of conversation about AI having jobs disappear. That's the first thing, right? So when you have that kind of threat or that feeling of threat, it doesn't matter where you are in the organization, that impacts you because that's your security. And I believe the more important conversation here is really how people at different stages of their career can work together to create more value as a group, right? Versus trying to sort of go solo or sort of be in this space together. It's almost like you have to shine a light on the concerns in a productive way. And I think there's an opportunity for emerging leaders as well as senior leaders to be able to do that productively and to benefit the company as well as themselves.
Do you feel that there's a longstanding assumption that senior professionals are naturally motivated to help those people coming up behind them?
I would say yes and no. I would say that in an ideal world and in a healthy culture and structure, absolutely. Being able to do that is actually a fantastic skill within sort of evolved leadership. In reality, sometimes, you may find that comes unstuck depending on what's going on in that organization. So I almost think of it today like reverse mentoring, if you like. Instead of thinking of that leader as just doing the things they can do in order to make the way for the next, is to think about it more collaboratively of how each can impact each other positively and therefore do things like increase productivity, bottom line, the things that the actual company cares more about. Because ultimately, you're working for an organization. They're not necessarily invested in your absolute personal outcome. Sorry to break it to you, your career is yours to manage, but nonetheless, some companies do this a little bit better than others, sometimes through formal channels, more often than not through informal, in my opinion.
Do you think that there's anything about what's going on in kind of our current society that's changing the way this relationship is kind of unfolding? Does anything really change with what's emerging in our lives today?
Yeah, I mean, so, AI. Sounds like a song. I'm sure it feels like a little bit something like Popeye would sing. But nonetheless, I think that, yes, but I would say the scenario is not new, okay? It's just faster, and we're really not sure what we're doing with it. There was a time when, and I'll use this certainly for those that are in sort of Gen X or maybe older even, we were all worried about what was going to happen with the internet, and et cetera, et cetera. It took some time to adopt, and there was people who knew what to do, people who didn't. It was the new technology. AI is much, much more than that. AI is absolutely a tool that is being utilized throughout the world, and I shouldn't even call it a tool. It's much more than a tool. AI has tools, but we have to think about it much more differently. And in companies, it can actually completely restructure the architecture and the infrastructure. So how do we keep the human component there with AI for absolute benefit to both? But this is a big overarching truce, in my opinion, whether you work for corporate, association, yourself, whatever it may be. We have to recognize, don't be frightened of it, or be frightened of it if that's what motivates you. But recognize that this is something you either work with or it will work you over, if that makes sense. Yeah. And that's why I think this sort of reverse mentorship, or how can we do this so that people who are coming into their careers and people who are already established in their careers can actually manage this and not be so focused on the conversation, this is going to take my job, this is going to take my job, or I have to protect, my island, if you like, and not make way for the next because of the pressures that I'm under. So how do we marry that and make sure that it is useful to everybody as well as the company? Because we just can't forget that. We can't forget that company primarily runs on either profit, productivity, reduced costs, efficiencies, wherever that might be.
Is there some examples you could give in terms of how emerging leaders can really walk into that room where they have someone that could be a potential mentor? Maybe there's a right way, maybe there's a wrong way. Feel free to take us wherever it comes to mind.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I think there's a way, right or wrong. Depends on the situation. But what I don't want to do is just give sort of fluffy answers here. I'm going to share with you some thoughts, and whether you agree or disagree is, again, the beauty of a conversation. I do think this rise of sort of reverse mentorship is important to acknowledge. And so let's think about it for a moment. If you're a senior leader, there's things that you, shall we say, effectively bring to the table. So, leadership, strategy, maybe influence, decision-making, relationship management. You've developed these skills alongside the technical skills of your role or your job. And then emerging leaders, the way I look at that is they're coming in with the questions, if you like, but also potentially with awareness of AI tools, or better awareness of the kinds of tools. I mean, you do need to do your homework and you do need to come into your job with some awareness. Don't be that person who says, oh, I just don't touch it, or I don't use it because it doesn't fly today. And then I would say digital trends, new technologies, and potentially workflow innovation. So you've got these sort of almost two groups. What a beautiful structure. If you really think about evolving and moving your company or organization forward, what a beautiful thing. If that can be, as I said before, married or in a relationship that's healthy. So I would give you a couple of examples. If you're somebody coming into the role, first and foremost, and I've talked to a couple of really talented senior leaders that I appreciate about this. And I've also talked to some emerging leaders or rising professionals coming in, like different perspectives, because, I'd like to get information from different people and their ideas and thoughts. And some of the things that seem to make things come unstuck for an emerging professional is if you're coming into the job and it's kind of all over your face of, okay, where to next? Where am I going next? When you go into a role, the first thing you can spend time doing, the most valuable thing, arguably, is listening and learning, and actually learning the job before you're thinking about where you're headed next. There's an argument, like it or lump it, where you want to think about how you effectively help your supervisor, your manager succeed. Nobody is more at risk, shall we say, in their job than the person that appears to be going after your job. It's just, that's just that simple. So you have to think about that a little bit, be creative about that, listen, learn about who you're working with. You don't have to be a sycophant about it, but you should be learning and listening. And then I would say, really what you're doing then is making your manager more effective. And if your manager's more effective, then your department or your organization is potentially more effective. And it might be as simple as, and sometimes the simplest things do make a difference, but before a board meeting, you're making key updates, you're identifying major decisions needed, you're preparing discussion points, like you're coming to your manager with that. I'm yet to meet somebody that's going to say, oh no, I'm so mad that you did this work for me, right? So that's an important one. And I would also say that you can look for the challenges within the organization. And this gets back to listening and learning. Talk to people. If you're in a company that you can do this, and not all companies you can, but some you can, when you come into your role, ask HR or ask your direct supervisor if there's an opportunity to meet with other leaders in the organization to learn more about the organization, to learn more about the challenges, the struggles, the story. In healthy organizations, this is considered proactive. In unhealthy organizations, this might be considered threatening or not enough time or why would you do that, etc. You do need to observe, right? But one way or another, learn enough about the organization and its challenges so that you can actually be useful, whether it's something you can offer directly, if there's opportunities through roundtabling, that kind of thing, or it's something you can discuss with your manager. So those ways of doing things haven't changed. You just have to be more proactive about it today. And then I would say, of course, it goes without saying that AI, get out of the headspace of it being there to replace people and think about the tools, because when you have expertise in those tools, companies aren't so concerned about the tools that are being used. They're concerned about the efficiencies that you're creating, the cost savings, those kinds of things. So it's really about that. Make sure that you're savvy enough that you can effectively help translate, right? Help your senior leader or help your manager translate, because you're coming in with this innovation, this different way of thinking. It's not enough just to be a good person who works hard. You will not be seen. It just doesn't work like that anymore. So you do need to think proactively, as it is your career to manage. But again, make sure you know your job first, right? If you don't know your job, you can have all the ideas in the world, but if you're failing at the fundamentals of what's put before you, that will be the sticker placed on your forehead effectively. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's something a lot of leaders can honestly relate to, where you have someone that has a lot of kind of vigor and ideas that comes into an organization, but they really haven't done the time and have gotten the greater kind of context. And frankly speaking, like they're kind of short on lived experience. So when you're young and little short in tooth, that concept of experience feels somewhat kind of vague, but the longer you live in life and work in your career, that value of experience kind of really materializes and gains kind of more and more weight, because it's really like trying to see a picture, but you could only are seeing, the bottom quarter of it. And
That's
somewhere
right.
along your life, you start to see kind of the big picture, where all the moving pieces of life and career and politics and relationships and all the things that make up this experience, they all start really making a lot more sense as they kind of connect together. And frankly speaking, as it relates to kind of emerging leaders, is that they may not have all those connections and all that kind of context that someone that's has more experience than them has.
And you're not expected to. That's the funny thing. Like, you're not expected to know everything. It's better to be that sponge. And I would put to you another side of this. And when we talk about like lived experience, I look at this and I'm like, well, how can somebody that's coming into this space who desperately wants lived experience, because they do want to grow and they do want to be seen or whatever that may be for them, progress in their career. So you have to think not just sort of, vertically, you have to think horizontally as well. So I would give an example. Like I often think like networking, right? Networking is like net worth. It's, the more you invest wisely, the stronger you return, better you return. And networking is not just inside your organization, but external to that as well. Network wisely. And Network with heart. And you know, I see this happen quite a lot, interestingly enough, where a young professional, right, they'll do lots and lots of networking when they're looking to find their job or find a job. Makes total sense. And then they'll get the job and then their networking drops off. And I'm like, oh gosh, don't do that. Two reasons. One, when you keep your network foaming, when you really invest in that, even outside of your work time, the social connections are really important, of course, it's healthy. But secondly, you're creating more lived experience because you are interacting with people in a way that is valuable. It's certainly the same, you could say, arguably, of volunteering. Depending on where you volunteer, you do need to be a little strategic. I mean, in Washington, D.C., I can tell you, the strategic volunteering makes all the sense in the world. It's a very political town. Who you know matters. However, I would also put to you, it's gross. There's a flip side to this. When you are in your casual conversations or chat or what it might be at work, and you're mentioning that you network or you volunteer at X organization that's kind of tied in to what you do, what you're signaling to your, you know, whether it be your direct supervisor or the people around you, is you're invested. You are actually more invested. You're not waiting for anybody to come along and create that investment. So that's something I would also add, if I may, about as you're an emerging leader going into the field. Don't let that drop. Keep that nice and healthy. It gets noticed in organizations. People drop off because they've started a new job and it's like, all right, I guess, you know, well, maybe we'll hear from them when they're looking for a job again. That's not good strategy.
Yeah, two things that came to mind is like one is really going back to what you were saying about taking the time to kind of get to know your organization, you know, be obsessed about doing the job well, number one. But I'm a really big believer in terms of like when you step into an organization, you really want to be doing as much of a speaking tour as you can, you know, who are the people inside of the organization?
That's
Like, what
right.
are their perspectives? What do they know about the value creation that's happening from their perspective? And hearing all those different perspectives and seeing how they may be different depending on who
That's
you're
right.
talking to,
It's
right?
quite the confusing road.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and like if the context is right, like is there an opportunity to get in the room with some of those people that that organization is serving?
Mhm.
Because that's probably maybe even bigger to some
It
degree
most
is how do
definitely
they
is.
see it?
It most definitely is. And that's why, you know, as we were saying before, like however you can have that occur, there is going to be a way. If it's not through a conversation with your direct supervisor and framed as such, I really want to learn more about the organization, you know, the perspective from the CFO can find time or whatever it may be. Alternately, don't be, you know, upset if you're told they just don't have that kind of time. Maybe take a step back and think about how they will have time or how you can create value for them to have time. It may even be something like, I mean, I'm just thinking off the cuff right now. Do you think they might do a lunch and learn for a group of 5 or 6 of us so that, you know, their time is better utilized than say one-to-one? Like, you want to get creative in that. And the funny thing about that is that people talk about those things. Your manager will be having coffee with somebody else and they say, you know, this was said by Susie, we'll say, you know, Susie mentioned, what do you think about that? Like, because don't forget they've got their peer groups as well. And so then arguably, again, getting back to your making your manager more effective. So it sort of all ties in. You just need to think about this in layers. And again, not always in vertical, but horizontal, looking for these kind of shifts and ways. If what you're doing is just waiting around in what we'll call the proverbial lunchroom or the chat room, good luck. You never know. I mean, you know, and you don't want to be that, you know, person who's there waiting outside somebody's door, you know, like, hi, I just happened to be here. You know, it's none of that. But it is important to recognize that there has to be value in it for that leader, that senior leader. There must be value in it for them. And people will be more responsive to people they like. It's just how that works. And you will find your people. It may not be who you even think, but how would you know if you don't sort of push yourself out of there? Look, this can be difficult for somebody who maybe is a little bit more introverted in their stance. And I think it's important that we recognise that too. Not everybody is out there sort of gung-ho, super confident. That can be really alarming depending on where you are. And that's okay, because a workplace deserves to have all sorts of people within it to be successful. But I would say even for that person who is an introvert, there's going to be a way. It might be through your peer group. It may be through finding somebody that is a senior leader who is a little more like your style and talking to them about it. Like, I was thinking about asking this or doing this, or maybe we could put together something. Own it. Like, you can be yourself in that space, because I think there's a huge emphasis on you've got to be super likable, super bubbly, super this. That's really hard. That's really asking a lot of a young professional, especially those that are coming off of, you know, the dreaded C word, COVID, you know, and all of that, and what's, you know, the impact there. So we need to be a little bit more mindful of that. And I think as senior leaders, there's an opportunity here too to think differently. You know, you need to be able to create an environment where experimentation's encouraged. You know, if you're not setting that environment, but you're asking people to come with an idea, if you're not creating that so that it's a comfortable space, then you're just going to get basically your ideas repeated back to you, just a different version of it, because people will be scared of taking a risk. And this is a very real thing in, I would say, some organisations today. You've got to be able to ask, you know, so what are you learning? You know, tell me about what you're learning, or what are you seeing? What do you think we could improve? And give them the time and opportunity to kind of project that. And listen. You have to listen. You don't always have to be the sage giver of advice. Sometimes listening is the superpower for a senior leader with an emerging young talent. And I think that's important.
We talked a lot about trust and shared incentives, and working collaboratively with emerging leaders and possible mentors. I'm wondering around your thoughts about, you know, what does an emerging leader do when that trust doesn't exist yet? Is there some specific advice you can give for an emerging leader out there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Look, first and foremost, it can be tough because you don't know why the trust doesn't exist. You could spend a lot of time trying to work that out. And what I would say to you is that, you know, in that instance, take a breath. Take a look at the situation. Don't get too personal about it. Take a look at the situation and maybe take another look at whether it's through observation day to day, language, emails, communication style, whatever, however you need to observe it. Pay attention. What are the things that this supervisor values? And I would hazard a guess, you're never going to go wrong with do what you are asked to do better, extremely well. Ensure there's no opportunity for fault. You can work with people who you could have done something, just a remarkable job, and they're going to pick it apart anyway. It's just human nature. Recognizing that and not taking it personally when you're a rising professional is extremely hard. I mean, I know I'm not going to swear on this, but some people are just not kind, or maybe you are talented and they are threatened. So you have to, shall we say, find, without putting yourself into a space of abuse. Don't get me wrong, this is really important. You don't ever want to, for as short a time as possible, if you're in a scenario of where you are effectively being abused, you do need to be able to get out of that, or you do need to make a choice to get out of that. It's never going to be worth it. And I've seen this before with young professionals where they'll just take it because they're new in their career. And then I've seen those that have chosen not to. And interestingly enough, the self-esteem that comes with that is remarkable, and it helps them in that career trajectory. But the bottom line is that if you don't have that trust between you, you've got a couple of options. But the first one is do what you are asked to do extremely well, because that's arguably there's nothing that can be faulted there really. And secondly, depending on the nature of the relationship and depending on your personal style and theirs, you can ask them, how do I build trust with you? How do I ensure that I'm that person you can rely on? Aside from doing my job well, is there anything here I'm missing? I want to learn and I want to know. Some people will appreciate that direct communication. Some people won't. And if that's the case, if it's point B and they don't, then look for other advocacy within the organisation. Never, ever, ever speak badly. This is 101, but trust me, even with your peer group, never speak badly about the person that you're reporting to. If you think it will not get back to them, you are incredibly naive. It will somehow. But the point is that you can discuss with, maybe it is HR or another manager. I'm really looking to build trust, use examples. I'm really looking to build trust in this space. Do you think I should discuss this with, like, you're learning as you're going. Don't assume that you know, shall we say, the exact right approach if you're struggling. It's not all on you. There is a way to work through that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great advice. I mean, ultimately, a lot of the theme of what we talked about today is kind of like that gap in incentives, and even a gap in terms of where knowledge and experience kind of overlap. Emerging leaders may have, some kind of new context, new skills to bring into a work environment that can improve their work function, maybe bring some new life into how that work's
Absolutely.
being done. But ultimately, it's the leader that's gonna, that mentor, possible future mentor, is ultimately the one that's going to be able to kind of direct that energy and new skills into something that's going to be mutually beneficial. And it's got to be known that, those emerging leaders shouldn't go in with presumptions that they're going into an environment that is always going to kind of go out of its way to try and serve them, right? Ultimately, you are being put into a position to be a source of productivity for a company. So think of how you can create value for the company, for those around you. And, I'm a big believer in goodwill. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're trying
Oh,
your
you
best
build
and there's
it.
a lot of goodwill, you can make things happen. And then also mentioning what you were saying there is just happening, that open dialogue, even if it does feel uncomfortable. I'm a big believer in just speaking openly about really anything that's going on between you and the people that you're working with. It's really important because when communication breaks down, all sorts of things kind of tend to suffer.
It absolutely does. And I think we have to remember that in all cases, everybody's fallible. Even somebody looks, who looks shiny in a big position or whatever it might be, we're all fallible and we're all human. You don't know what their day is. They don't know what your day is. So just sort of, that's why I say always take a breath. And, it's a good place to start. And the goodwill piece, you're correct. To me, that's sort of up there with networking, right? Goodwill by performance, productivity, helping to increase profit or increase membership or whatever it may be. But also that networking piece, because people are more responsive with people that they like or care about. It's just human nature. So it is, I think, deeply important. And I think mentorship, we sometimes go, okay, in my job, and that gets back to, your networking within organizations and making sure you don't lose track of that, because there's phenomenal opportunities for mentorship and growth and learning within those streams. They're the things that kind of, they feel like they're on the sidelines, and they are on the sidelines. but they are incredibly important, particularly when you're going through struggles.
Well, Amberlee, we covered a lot of ground today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Are you open to taking a few questions from the audience?
I would love to take a few questions. My favorite ice cream.
So our first one here is, in a mentor-mentee relationship, who should initiate contact? Is it the responsibility of the emerging professional to be proactive, or can a senior professional also start the relationship?
Great question. The answer is either or, and do it now. Meaning, if you're a mentee, it is your career. You're at the start of your career, the beginning of your career. You have to ask yourself, am I going to wait until somebody else decides for me? And if the answer is no, that's your answer.
One more question before we head out of here. So if you've been, if you've have never had a mentor and aren't sure what's involved in the relationship or how to find a mentor, where should we start?
Oh, wow. I love this. You know why? Because I can do a shameless plug. So the American Marketing Association in Washington, D.C. has a website called AMADC.org. We actually have a program, the Marketing Mentors Network. You'll get some great information there. Also, if you want to volunteer, get more involved, which is also about mentorship, I really encourage you to start there or to go there. And of course, you know, I think that you may be quietly delighted by just how welcoming that is. It is an organization that is very much community first and very much involved in an emerging leaders type program. So please check it out.
Well,
Shameless
Amberlee,
plug.
well, I love it. Amberlee, it's been so great to have you here and having this
Likewise,
conversation
Marcus.
with you. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and the leadership that you're bringing to this topic.
It takes a
So
team.
thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks so much, Marcus. Take care.
And for everyone at home, thank you so much for spending your time with us. If you want to see more conversations like this, head over to hub.talewinddigital.com, and we'll see you next time on Association Amplified Live.